welcome to my channel, Books in the Shire. In 2023, I set a goal for myself to read more books that I own instead of borrowing from, either the library or reading on Scribd and whatnot, just because I own way too many books. Let's be real here, book consumerism is like a big thing online, and I know so many booktubers and bookstagrammers and all of that have talked about it in the past, so I'm not gonna dwell on it, but I will be honest, and I have fed into that. I started reading again, actively, probably, I think in 2019. And since then, I have accumulated a ton of books, and I don't need as many as I do. Most of my shelves are unread. I haven't read even 50% of what I own. I think I'm in the 30% range, which I will get more into this video. Because of that, because I own way too many books, I'm putting myself on this challenge for several reasons. One, to limit my spending on book buying, because that is realistically what I spend a lot of my money on. And while that is not a bad thing, because reading is something I enjoy, I don't need to buy books when I have so many unread books that I own already. You know what I mean? I'd rather save that money for either going on vacations or buying other things that I'm interested in, like investing in games and stuff. Not investing in games, what am I saying? Buying games and all that, because I really like to game. So, just all of those reasons, I want to limit my spending on books because I really don't need to be spending so much money. But secondly, I'm doing it too because I want to lower the number of unread books I have on my shelf. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a ton of unread books on your shelves, but for me personally, I just don't see the point in having all of these books when I've never read them and being like, oh, I'll get to it one day, and then having on my shelf for years. I want to try and lower that number. So that's kind of why I'm doing this. Also too, feeding into, the consumerism with books. Like I said, I've fed into that a lot within the past few years, especially as I was active on Bookstagram, because I started my Bookstagram, I think, in 2019. When I started, I had a short bookshelf that had 3 shelves on it, and I probably had 2 of those 3 shelves filled. That's how many books I owned at that point. Granted, that was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, so, it makes sense that I would have accumulated more, but I've more than tripled the amount of books I own. Okay, I think I've actually way more than tripled. It's probably 6 times the amount that I had before. And while that may not be super crazy if you're reading a lot, I wasn't reading that much. I mean, I was a full-time student. I was finishing my undergrad and then I started grad school immediately after. I was a full-time student. I didn't have the time or energy to dedicate to reading all the time. So I would probably read maybe 4 books a month, and that was pretty generous sometimes. So if I'm reading 4 books a month, but I own 200 unread books, the math isn't mathing, okay? I'm not gonna read that many. I really wanna focus on, prioritizing reading the books I own and trying to not buy as many books, because I don't want to put more books on my shelf when I haven't read a ton. Yeah, whole long intro spiel as to why I'm doing this, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of document my journey doing it. I know it's February and it's halfway through February, so it's a bit late to be starting this intro video for my challenge, I guess, but I thought it would be good to kind of hold myself accountable, but then maybe if people enjoy it, inspire them to do it, or I don't know. I just thought it would be fun for myself to, go through my process and be transparent and honest about book consumerism and all of that, because I'm not gonna lie about it, I've totally fed into it. I have way more books than I realistically need, and honestly, I've kept books that I really don't care that much about because I felt the need to have books, to have these massive shelves with tons and tons of books on them. That's not what reading's about. While that is an element, there are people who are book collectors. I would consider myself as such. I think for me personally, I want to get a bit more away from book collecting and more about reading, prioritizing that as opposed to just buying books. I wanted to go over some of my spreadsheets that I'm using to track kind of all of this. These spreadsheets I made myself, but I cannot take credit because I have copied from other creators. So these are not my ideas. I just translated some of them into a spreadsheet, or I've adjusted them to be for my liking. But this is just to kind of hold me accountable, allow me to track and see what I am you know, reading how I'm doing on my goal and all of that. So before we get into my spreadsheets, kind of talking more about book consumerism, like I said, I buy a ton of books, which is not good. Like that's where a majority of my money goes, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't want my money to just go to books. Like me and my friends have a trip planned for November of this year, so I want to prioritize saving for that trip as opposed to buying more books that I will not read in a few years, you know. But basically, I put myself on a book buying ban for this year, and I'm not going to, how do I say it? Like my book buying ban isn't like a, for the entire year, I'm not going to buy books, but I'm going to try and spread out my book buying and try to make it that I only buy like 5 books at a time. Because the holidays just happened, I got a ton of Barnes & Noble gift cards. So spoiler alert, I have bought books this year, but those were all through gift cards. I didn't spend my own money. So I feel like that's kind of a cheat right there. I'll talk a bit more about that too when I get to that part of my spreadsheet. But yeah, basically my book buying ban is I'm going to just try and withhold buying books for as long as possible. And then when I do buy books, either use gift cards, or if I don't have any more gift cards left, you know, limit the amount I'm spending. Either be like, okay, I'm only going to spend $100 today, or I'm only buying 2 books, like however I want to limit it. But my goal is to try and go at least 3 months without buying books. And to some people that might sound like crazy. It's like, oh my God, you buy books so often. I do, and it's not intentional. I don't even realize it's happening. And that's also something that I want to prioritize with this challenge is I don't even realize how often I'm buying books. You know, me and my sister will just go into town and go to Barnes & Noble, and I'll end up buying a book or 5 books, you know. I don't even know. It happens. And then sometimes, in all honesty, I get depresso, and so I buy books online, and then I'm like, oh my God, my books, yay. So that's not a good habit either, which I want to try and break. But then a third part to that is I am subscribed to Owlcray and Fairy Loot. And so that's a whole other part of this video, which I will get into, but I am subscribed to both of those subscription services, and I have for, I think, 2 years now. And so I honestly even forget that I'm putting money towards that, you know, and so I'll get my boxes and I'm like, ooh, another book. And then that's another unread book I'll have on my shelf for years. Plus I'm spending a ton of money on those boxes because I get the book plus the little like items and stuff. So that's something it's like I want to either not necessarily reconsider, but think about, do I want to continue with that, or do I want to save my money and just do what I'm doing, which I will talk a bit more about that. Let's get into my handy dandy spreadsheet. So I have 2 separate spreadsheets. One is my book database spreadsheet, and then one is my 2023 book reading tracker. So my book database spreadsheet is mostly all the books I own and keeping track of series. So that's kind of what this one is about. And then my 2023 tracker is about my 2023 reading and my consumerism of 2023. So like how many books I'm buying, how many books I'm unhauling, all of that jazz. So real quick on my book database spreadsheet, I have my library tab, and this is all alphabetical by author's last name. This is all the books I own. You can see that I have whether I've read it or not. If it's checked, that means I've read it. Whether it's part of a series, if it's a special edition, where I got it from, and my rating if I've read it. And then to the side over here, I have my general statistics. So I own 286 books, and I think this is actually a bit inaccurate because I recently just got a Fairy Loot box. So I'm going to say I have about 288 books right now because I haven't updated my spreadsheet. And so out of those 288 books, I've only read 110. While that is a high number and that is a good number, I don't like that because as you can see below, I've only read 38% of the books I own. I want to, at a minimum, have read 50% of the books I own, and then, you know, try to read more as I'm going. So I really don't like that number. Some people might think it's a really great number. Some people might be like, oh my God, that's a terrible number. Personally, I don't like it, and that's why I am doing this challenge for myself. I want to make that number higher. My goal is to get it to at least 50% this year. So this is my 2023 book tracker. So I have my unread books tab. So I started this year with 184 unread books. So I've read, you know, books throughout the year. So that's why the number is a bit different on my other spreadsheet, because I've updated that spreadsheet for the books that I've read. I started with 184 unread books this year. So what I've been doing is I've read the book or I've DNF'd it. I'll put that number here. So say I read a book in March, it auto updates all of my numbers. In January, I read 10 of the books that I owned. I read 9 and I DNF'd 1, but I put those in the same category. I did acquire 5 books, one of those books being I think it was Owl Crate. I technically, even though I have books from that month that I am going to unhaul, I have not unhauled them yet, so that's why that's a 0. Basically, at the end of that month, I was at 179 owned unread books. You know, so even though I read a ton, I acquired a ton too, so that was not that great. Not including the Owl Crate, but the 4 books that I did acquire, I bought all through gift cards, so it wasn't a total hit because I wasn't spending my own money, but I did acquire them. And I'll explain those in a bit. In February so far, I have read 3 of the books that I own, and I've acquired 1, and that one acquired was from a Fairy Loot box. So I didn't spend any of my own money. I didn't use gift cards. Well, okay, I did spend my own money. As of right now, I have 177 unread books on my shelf. I'm doing pretty decent in terms of reading. All of the books I've read so far this year have been books on my shelf. I have not read any library books or books that I don't own. So that's been really great. But the bad part is the acquisitions. I've acquired way too many books for my liking. And so that's something I want to focus on as I go through the year, is trying to buy less. So the total number of unread books I started with was 184. My goal is to get this to 150 by the end of this year. And then I'll go to my book buying spreadsheet just to kind of explain. So I have it where I have the different, how I'm going to highlight. So if I bought a book, I'm going to highlight it in red. If I didn't buy a book, it's going to be dark blue. But if I used a gift card, it's light blue. So we can see for January, I only bought books on one day, and that was the 30th. I bought 4 books that day, and I spent zero money. I spent $0 technically because I used gift cards. And I put series continuation because, like I said, I want to try and prioritize continuing with series that I've started. So 2 of those 4 books I bought were to continue in a series I've already started. So that's why I put that there. So I know that I am actively working towards that goal too. So out of those 4 books that I bought in January, I bought Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, Morning Star by Pierce Brown, Song of Silver Flame by Night by Emily Wen Zhao, and then Team Avatar Tales by Jean Luen Yang. Actually, I just realized 3 of those books were continuations, so I'm going to update that real quick because Team Avatar Tales is continuing the Avatar series, so the Avatar graphic novel, so that counts. I don't know why I didn't count it. But yeah, you can kind of see whether if it's series, if it's new, which they all work, 'cause I bought them from Barnes & Noble. How much I spent, I put 0 because I did use gift cards, and that's why I put paid via gift card. I haven't read any of them, so that's why that's there. But I have my statistics and stuff on the side to kind of keep track if I am reading books that I've bought that year, and to kind of track how much money I'm spending. So say I spent $5 on a book, that'll autofill in the total spent box that I've spent $5 so far. Basically, it's just kind of to show me how much I'm spending on buying books, because I'm sure it's an astronomical number that I don't actually want to know, but I do want to know it so I can know for future years like how to limit myself and all of that jazz. So a ton of stuff going on here. And then the last page on my spreadsheet that I'll show you is my book boxes spreadsheet. So like I said, I am subscribed to Fairy Loot and Owl Crate, and so this is so I can keep track of what books I got that year. Whether I would have purchased them anyways had I not got it in the book box, and if I do read it, my rating. The reason I'm tracking this is to know, 1, how many books I'm actually reading from book boxes, but 2, how many I liked, to know whether I want to keep subscribing to that book box. Because genuinely, I don't want to subscribe to 2, I'd rather just subscribe to 1. Just to save money for myself, not because one's better than the other, but this is to kind of help me gauge which one I tend to veer more towards in terms of items and or books that they put in the boxes. So that's why I have this. The 2 books in the January book boxes I had never heard of before I got them in the box, so that's kind of why I put maybe in the would I purchase anyways. After reading the synopses, I think Spice Road I probably would have looked into purchasing, but The Buried and the Bound, maybe not. but I'm not gonna knock it till I try them. So I'm gonna mark whether I've read them or not once I do read them. I want to try and prioritize reading the book box books that I get that year instead of waiting, because a lot of the time I'll maybe read one or two of them, which is not great. They're just sitting on my shelf, so that's kind of feeding into why I have such a high number of unread books. Those are my spreadsheets that I'm using this year to track my reading, particularly reading my unread books, and kind of to know how much I'm buying, how many books I'm buying, how much I'm spending, all of that stuff, and keeping track of my book subscriptions. It's all just to kind of help me understand my reading and buying habits. My biggest priority of this is to read the books I already own, because that has been a major thing for me for years since I started reading again. Is I've always been upset with myself at the end of the year because I didn't read what I owned. I bought too much, all of that. So that's why I'm doing this. To hold myself accountable, to try and be better at that. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in another one.